This weekend we celebrate both our mothers and we celebrate our graduates, Jalen, Brody, and Ben, and Hunter, and Leah. And for our graduates, this will be a very busy time in their lives. It'll be a time full of changes. I've been through entire summers of my life that have come and gone where I can't remember anything remarkable happening in those summers, but I do remember the summer after my senior year. And it's amazing to think how many important moments in my life happened during that time. So many events that actually still have an effect on my life to this day, that are still relevant. Changes that happened to me that have led me to be right here in this place speaking to you right now. They started the summer after I graduated. And had they not happened, I don't think I would be here, and I don't think I would be a priest. So for our time here this morning, I want us to think very deliberately on the meaning of certain events in our lives. Perhaps you take some time out of this busy summer and ask yourselves, how did I get here? And who are the people that have led me here? What events, good and bad, had to happen in order for me to be where I am in life? And when you stop to think about these things, you will notice that two things. Number one, that we live in a very small world. And number two, that we live in a great big world. Both are true. But it's when the small world and the big world sort of come together at certain moments in our lives, that's when we have to be paying attention. I was taught from a very young age that there's no such thing as coincidences, that, everything, even the smallest details of our lives have great meaning. Even the smallest details of our lives have great significance and sacredness. And when I look back on certain events in my life, it's quite remarkable that I'm here right now. It's as if God, every step of the way, has been preparing me my whole life, not only to be a priest, but to be a priest in this parish in particular, specifically. And it's kind of freaky, actually, how this place entangled itself in my life in a very personal way long before I ever moved here, long before the bishop called me that March afternoon in 2016 to tell me that I would be the pastor here. And so, looking from the outside, I'm sure that it all just seems like a bunch of coincidences once I go through them all. But from my perspective, it's full of meaning. And perhaps that's the thing that I want you to take away from this particular point in life, that every aspect and every moment of your life has meaning, but you have to look for it. Since God doesn't see time like we do, he doesn't see time from one moment to the next in a linear fashion. It's very difficult for me to tell this story, but I'm going to try. So I'm going to be talking a lot about myself, but I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be a way that can maybe prime your imagination and your memory to think of ways in which God has lined things up for you to go the way that things have. So from your perspective, it's going to seem like I'm jumping around rather disjointedly, telling a bunch of different stories, because the way that God works is sort of like a spider web. When you touch one thread, all the others move with it, and then you have to kind of explain those threads as well. It's all interconnected and tied together. But hopefully you'll sort of get an idea of the whole picture when I'm done relating it to you. Part of my story begins in the year 1914, so a long time ago. There is a priest named Father Joseph Kentenich who taught at a seminary in the town of Schoenstatt, Germany. And one of the projects that he had his seminarians take on was transforming a garden shed into a little chapel, into a shrine dedicated to the Mother of God, Mary. And this garden shed, it's not like something that you would go to Menards and buy. It was built in the 1500s out of timber and stucco, so it's pretty sturdy compared to what we would normally think of as a garden shed. But eventually this group of seminarians, well, it expanded beyond seminarians. And this group, it included the education and spiritual nourishment of young people and of families. And this all became part of what Father Kentenich called the Schoenstatt movement, which is still around today. It was a way for young people and young families to consecrate themselves completely to Jesus through the heart of his mother Mary, and to do so especially when things seem impossible. Basically, taking a leap of faith and trusting that God will take care of you. There's a thing in Schoenstatt called the blank check agreement, where you basically sort of just surrender your life completely to God, and rather than living your life by your own will, you live life by God's will, because it's only in God's will that we are assured of anything. And this is the conclusion that Father Kentenich came to through life experience. He lived through 2 world wars in his home country, in Germany. Over time, the Schoenstatt movement spread across the world. Hundreds of these of replicas of the original garden shed shrine in Germany were built all around the world. In 1992, this is the reason why I'm telling this story. In 1992, my parents were the first Nebraskans to become a part of the Schoenstatt movement. Along with a few other couples, they made their consecration to Jesus through Mary, Mother Thrice Admirable, Queen and Victress of Schoenstatt. When I was in the seminary, I became the first seminarian in the history of our diocese to make that same Schoenstatt consecration some years later. So just to give you an idea of how much of a role the Schoenstatt movement played in my family, here's a little taste. I wrote my master's thesis in the seminary on Father Kentenich, which is a 75-page paper analysis of his life and priesthood. So we were pretty dedicated. And as a result of being consecrated to Jesus through Mary, Mary has kind of followed me around my whole life. I have a friend, her name is Sister Joy, and Sister Joy often talks about certain saints that stalk you, and Mary is certainly one of the saints that stalk me. But anyways, so Mary has followed me throughout my entire life. My first assignment as a deacon was to St. Mary's Parish in Nebraska City. My first assignment as a priest was St. Mary's Parish in David City. And my first assignment as a pastor, well, you'll see that it involves Mary a lot as well. So it's fitting that I say all of this, that we're celebrating Mother's Day on top of it. Next part of the story. On Saturday, September 20th, 1941, Father Joseph Kentenich was arrested by the Nazi Gestapo. For months, they had been closing in on him. And as I said, Father Kentenich was a member of the faculty of the seminary, and the Nazi regime shut down the seminary in 1933, and so for 8 years, he was basically going rogue on the Nazi government and continuing his work of educating young Catholics. Father Kentenich was not afraid when it came to preaching and protesting against the Nazi government, and this is what drew their attention. Eventually, he was arrested and he was imprisoned in the Dachau concentration camp in Germany. Dachau was where the political enemies of the Nazi state were imprisoned, and so most Catholic priests, if they are arrested by the Gestapo, were incarcerated in the Dachau concentration camp, work camp. And so it was there in Dachau that Father Kentenich met many other priests from across Europe. Father Kentenich was assigned to prison block number 28, which is where most of the Polish priests were also assigned. And it's there in block 28 that Father Kentenich would meet a young Polish army chaplain named Father Henry Dennis, who had been held at Dachau for the entirety of World War II. His regiment had been captured almost immediately during the Nazi invasion of Poland. And throughout his years in Dachau, Father Dennis had been tortured and experimented upon by being exposed to alternating temperatures of extreme cold and then extreme heat and then back to cold again. He was injected with various viruses and diseases like malaria. Father Dennis had nearly lost all hope, and that's when he met Father Kentenich. And it was Father Kentenich that instilled in Father Dennis to make a blank check agreement with God to entrust your entire life to and your will to the Heavenly Father. And so he did, and Father Kentenich especially taught Father Dennis to have a devotion to Mary. So it was on October 7th, 1944. October 7th is the feast day of the Holy Rosary. A miracle happened. Some prisoners had attempted to escape the concentration camp, and as a punishment, the prisoners were called to attention and they had to line up outside their barracks. And what they would do is, as a punishment, random prisoner numbers would be called out, and those random prisoners would be immediately executed by firing squad. And this is what Father Dennis wrote on that day. He says, "It was a cold and rainy and windy morning. There was a long roll call and a prolonged counting. There were many corpses on that day, and all the dead had to be brought and placed in line with those who were alive. There was a lot of shouting, cursing, kicking, and clubbing. One prisoner was missing. Finally, they found him. He was dead. To forget that hell on earth, deep in my mind and my heart, I prayed the rosary. The rosary took me up there into a different world. There were moments that I did not hear anything. Around 7:30 a.m., we left the camp to our working places. One German priest, a good friend of mine, possibly Father Kentenick actually, asked me, 'Henry, why did they call your name and your number?' Then 2 Polish priests asked me, 'Henry, what did they want from you?' My blood stopped to circulate. To be called and not to report at once, that is death. And death flashed before my mind as never before. Oh, what excruciating hours those hours were. But when we returned to the camp, nobody called me. Evidently, they had got their number of victims. They always called more than they needed. A dear friend of mine, Father Francis Doctora, was also called on that day. He reported, and he never came back. And it was on that day, October 7th, 1944, that I made a promise, a vow, that if I ever leave the camp alive, I would give the Blessed Mother some kind of a visible gratitude, maybe a little shrine." So to summarize, Father Dennis escaped certain death because he was too busy praying the rosary on the Feast of the Holy Rosary. If this were a movie script, it would be panned by critics for being too ridiculous and unbelievable, right? When the concentration camps were liberated by Allied forces in 1944, Father Dennis could not return to his homeland because now it was under the control of the communist regime. And so at the invite of Bishop Kuchera of the Diocese of Lincoln, he immigrated to America. And he was assigned to a couple of parishes and eventually to St. Germanus Parish in Arapahoe in 1949. So now let's talk about St. Germanus, the person, not the church. So St. Germanus was the bishop of Constantinople, which was one of the most important cities in the ancient world. He lived in the 600s, the 7th century. And during his time as bishop of Constantinople, the spread of the new religion of Islam had started this movement, this thing called iconoclasm. And iconoclasm is the idea that religious images like statues and icons and paintings are considered idolatry, idols, and as such they must be destroyed. And so St. Germanus, the bishop of Constantinople, fought against the destruction of religious art. Now let's talk about St. Germanus, the church in Arapahoe. So 7 years after arriving in Arapahoe in August of 1956, Father Dennis realized the fulfillment of the vow that he had made on October 7th, 1944 in the concentration camp 12 years earlier. He built a shrine dedicated to Our Lady of Fatima. And you guys probably been to it or seen it or driven by it. He built it using contributions of money from 43 different states, as well as gifts from Canada and Europe. And this shrine depicts the appearance of Our Lady of Fatima to the 3 children, the 3 shepherd children of Fatima. He added an altar to the shrine so that Mass could be offered outside in the shrine. And then this shrine is what makes the church in Arapahoe sort of famous in this area to this day. People from all over the country visit the shrine. There's been, books written about sacred places across the country, and the shrine ends up in a lot of them. And so you have people from all over the country and even the world that visit. Now, keep in mind, this parish was named St. Germanus nearly 70 years before Father Dennis built the shrine. It just so happened that a shrine of statues would be built at St. Germanus' church, statues that St. Germanus, the person, helped to defend the use of within the church. And on top of that, the feast day of St. Germanus of Constantinople is May 12th, today, and the day after is the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima. They both line up, even though they weren't ever intended to. So let's go through how these coincidences affected me. So I was assigned to St. Germanus Parish in Arapahoe and St. John's in Cambridge as my first assignment as a pastor. exactly 60 years after Father Dennis built the shrine. In a parish named after St. Germanus, who defended the use of statues, the only church called St. Germanus that I've ever heard of in the whole world, whose feast day is the day before Our Lady of Fatima, a shrine dedicated to Our Lady of Fatima that was likely inspired by Father Kentenich, who I wrote a 75-page paper about when I was in college. A priest who founded the Schoenstatt movement, an organization that my family has been involved in since I was 10 years old. That's just the appetizer, there's more. So, on May 31st, 2010, it gets crazy here, I celebrated my second Mass ever as a priest in the tiny little Schoenstatt shrine that my parents helped build in Crete, Nebraska. So these little shrines, they're a replica of the original Garden Shed shrine in Germany, and they're tiny. They hold like maybe 20 people at the most. But 2 of those 20 people on that Monday afternoon in May of 2010 were members of this parish, Steve and Connie Whitty. And you see, I don't recall a time in my life where I didn't know Steve and Connie Whitty because my parents were friends with them from the time when I was quite young, like 7 or 8 years old. And so they were at my ordination, they were at my first Mass, and they were at my second Mass in this tiny little church in the middle of nowhere. Little did I know that my first assignment as a pastor would be here in Cambridge as their pastor. In May of 2017, 11 months after I arrived here, Bishop Conley came to the shrine in Arapahoe to celebrate an outdoor Mass in the shrine on the 100th anniversary of the miracle of Our Lady of Fatima. And that year, Pope Francis dedicated the shrine in Arapahoe, an official place of pilgrimage, granting a plenary indulgence for those who prayed there for the entire year. So it seems that I was assigned just in time to St. Germanus to be a part of that. On March 31st, 2018, I had the honor of giving the sacrament of confirmation to my next-door neighbor, Sarah Rother. She lives across the street from me. Well, she did. They just moved. She's now Sarah Calvert, so she's Mr. Calvert's wife. I only bring this up because I've also known Sarah my entire life, it turns out. And we grew up together. She was my first cousin Casey's best friend. I have memories of playing with Sarah at my grandmother's house after school. And 20-something years later, 200 miles away, we happened to live across the street from each other. Another weird thing. So I attended seminary at St. Charles Borromeo Seminary, which is in Lower Merion Township, which is a neighborhood in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My other neighbor across the street is also from Lower Merion Township in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Sandra Johnson. Where she probably taught some of you in CC, I would imagine. What are the chances that 2 people who lived in the same neighborhood in Philadelphia would randomly move across the street from each other in Cambridge, Nebraska? I doubt there's 2 people in the entire city of Lincoln that have been to Lower Merion Township in Pennsylvania. It's crazy. But one last thing, and this is when things get a little scary almost. Back when I was ordained a priest, we were given a book. This is the book. It's called A Priest Forever. And this book is basically a 3-ring binder, and you can add pages to it, and there's a reason for that. This 3-ring binder, each page of the book contains a short biography of any priest that has ever served in the Diocese of Lincoln. Even if he was only here for a few weeks, all the way to a few decades, it's got a short 1-page biography of each priest. And these pages are arranged in chronological order from January 1st to December 31st, and each day commemorates a day that a priest died, so the day on which they died. And it's kind of basically like a history of our diocese, at least from the terms of the clergy of our diocese. My mother, when she found out that I had this book, she took it and she read it from cover to cover in about 2 sittings within just a couple of days. So why do I bring this up? Like I said, it's all a spider web. It's all connected together. So I have a friend. I've talked about her before. Her name is Grace. She is a young mother of 5 children, 5 boys, in her 30s, early 30s. Grace has certain spiritual gifts that only a few people throughout history have been granted. There are saints like St. Padre Pio, St. John Vianney, who could visually see and sometimes even have conversations with the saints. Grace is one of these people. And from time to time, she can physically see the saints. They're always around us, she says, but from time to time, she is allowed to see them. She has been given this gift of being able to see them some of the time. She doesn't talk about this for obvious reasons. Most people would probably diagnose her with hallucinations or label her as schizophrenic. In fact, I've never actually had a verbal conversation with her about this stuff. Only in handwritten letters, which I don't know if you guys know. It's where you take your hand and you write on a piece of paper and then you put it in this thing called the mail and it gets to them eventually, like weeks later sometimes. But anyway, so I've only talked to her about this sort of thing in letters, and I will simply say that by the way that she writes, you can tell that her experiences are authentic. Mystics, so these are certain saints that are given these types of spiritual gifts, they have a certain way of speaking, and Grace very much speaks along the lines of saints like Saint Teresa of Avila or Saint Therese of Lisieux. Of course, you would never know it. Like I said, Grace is a young mother. She's not some nun living in a monastery somewhere. She is joyful and she is bubbly and she is a social butterfly. She's very outgoing. She's always full of energy. But one time when we were on a high school retreat, we were directing a high school retreat together, this is all coming from her in a letter, remember, she explained that my brother, who was also helping me direct the retreat, he was leading a discussion at his little table with high school students, and she saw St. Joseph standing there right beside him. My brother is a father of 3, so it's fitting. There is a special dinner at a certain point on these retreats that's called the agape meal. And agape is the Greek word for unconditional love, self-sacrificial love. And St. Therese, Grace says, was at that agape meal. There's St. Therese, by the way. We have a statue of her. Coincidence. Anyways, so the word agape means self-sacrificial love, and St. Therese was famous for saying that her vocation was to love. And so that was the conclusion why St. Therese was at that meal. When my best friend Spencer was giving his talk, which is a particularly difficult talk to give, I won't go into the details, she said that St. Michael the Archangel was standing behind him with his hands on his shoulders. And she writes that St. Michael is the most impressive of all the saints in terms of both his size and his beauty. And she says, when I was giving my talk, which also isn't easy to give, she said that she saw a priest standing with me and that she didn't recognize this priest. But she was given the impression that this was a country priest and that he was sent to me to intercede for me throughout my entire life, and especially at the moment of my death. Now, I have no idea who this priest was either. And I brought this up in some forums that I'm on online, and they're like, oh, is it St. John Vianney? I'm like, I don't think it's any saint that any of us know. I just got that impression from her. And I never really wanted to, dig into it deeper. When you're talking about a priest that is praying for you at your death, I don't really want to know about my death yet. So I didn't go into it too deep. It wasn't until this last month, April, that I got an idea. The book. I wonder which priest died on my birthday. Maybe it's that priest. So I turned to April 11th. It's my birthday. A priest named Father William E. Grace died on my birthday in 1947. Obviously, that's before I was born. But Father William Grace, which I was like, my friend Grace, this priest's name, Father Grace, like that's kind of weird, right? His first assignment as a pastor was Cambridge from 1933 to 1934, exactly 50 years before I was born. I think I found my country priest who is likely standing next to me right now. And then I started looking at the dates of other priest deaths around the date of April 11th. If you turn literally one page, you get to a priest that died April 10th, 2001, so that would have been the year that I graduated from high school. And you get Father Charles Gergen, who is here for 21 years. If you skip ahead 5 days to April 16th, you get Father Henry Dennis, who is the pastor in Arapahoe, who built the shrine. He died 5 days after my first birthday. It's kind of crazy. And what's even crazier is that April 11th wasn't even supposed to be my birthday. I was born a few weeks early. It's premature. But maybe I was born early so that I could have these priests that served here as my patron saints. So from the literal first days of my life to the literal last day of my life, when Father Grace is praying for me, God has made it abundantly clear that he will be there. Now, I don't expect any of these things to seem like a big deal to you, because they're not for you, they're for me. It's my personal story. But they are ways of God assuring me that none of this is an accident, that he has a plan for me. And guess what? He has a plan for you, especially the 5 of you that I'm talking to right now. It is highly unlikely that you will see his plan for you while wasting all your free time swiping and scrolling on your phones. It is highly unlikely that you will discover his plan for you on TikTok or Instagram, or whatever social media you're on. He speaks to us all the time in little ways. But we have to be paying attention. You have to be looking out for these little connections, like all the ones that I just listed to you. And so that's my homework assignment to you for the rest of your lives, to reflect on your life. And I'm not saying this to be the old guy telling you to get off your phone. I'm telling you this because God finds you infinitely interesting. The life that is not reflected upon is meaningless, and life without meaning is boring, and life is anything but boring. Life is full of meaning. And that will be made very clear to you if you take the time to see how God works in little ways to tell you big things about yourself. To see that God's hand is guiding you the entire way. You'll realize that every single moment of your life is meaningful because every moment is sacred because you are sacred.